Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm your host, Andrea Bryan Garner, and joining me on the program today, we have the Honorable Minister of Public Service, Ms. Sonia Parag, and she's here to talk about the issue regarding the healthcare workers who've been protesting over the last 2 weeks or so. Also joining me is Mr. Charles Ogle, who's the Chief Labor Officer from the Ministry of Labor. Thank you so much for joining me on today's program.
Good afternoon, Andrea.
Good afternoon. And basically, we're here to talk a little more in depth about the issue. This is of national interest. And for us to debunk and, of course, dispel certain misconceptions with regard to the position of the Ministry of both Labor and Public Service. So, Minister, I'd like to start with you in terms of your position and in terms of the Ministry's position when it comes to the healthcare workers and their protest action.
Well, first of all, Andrea, thank you for your question. The first thing that I want to see is that the healthcare workers, they are deemed under the category of essential services for a reason. And that is that their importance is well known in society. It is well known to the point where we have categorized them under the Essential Services Act, or the Public Utilities Undertaking and Public Health Services Act. For the past 2 weeks or so, we have seen protest action by healthcare workers, and the Ministry of Public Service has recognized that it is the primary party in an agreement, a collective bargaining agreement with the Guyana Public Service Union. And that is the reason why I'm here today. I recognize that the Georgetown Public Hospital is incorporated as its own body. However, due to my ties with the GPSU, I am here. Protest action has been taken in relation to several issues, it would appear. However, this is what I wish to say in relation to that. The issues raised by the healthcare workers, the nurses in particular, from the Georgetown Public Hospital, the West Demerara Regional Hospital, Fort Wellington, and Linden. These are issues that were not made known to the Public Service Ministry as a grievance. There was no meeting to engage a discussion on that. However, this is what I would say. These actions taken in the Essential Services Act, you have certain procedures set out, which you must invoke to get to a point of a result. The Ministry of Labor has never been engaged. And we are well aware that these protests are politically instigated. They're politically instigated. They're instigated and coordinated by the union for a reason. And I say this, Andrea, because for several months now, the Georgetown Public Hospital, or the Ministry of Health, or Public Health as it then was, were making several requests through the Department of Public Service, as it was then, to the Ministry of Finance for several increases in allowance. And I want the public to hear this, that the then Minister of Finance, Mr. Winston Jordan, flatly refused and rejected those requests for increase in allowances. And here we are with the Irfanali administration, and as a government, we are offering in our budget, and due to financial constraint, this is what we are able to offer now. We are offering $150 million for frontline workers. And that when the budget has been passed and released, then we will be able to disburse or however the money is disbursed to the frontline workers, they will be able to benefit from that.
During the period before when those requests were made to the Finance Ministry at that time, was there any action brought against the Public Service Ministry or perhaps to Labor in terms of, those requests being denied?
No, there was no protest action. This is what surprises me so today, because at that time when that was flatly refused, and I have heard previous press conferences being made by members of the opposition stating that requests were actively being considered by the Ministry of Finance. That is not so. That is not so. It was flatly refused. And I find it very strange and peculiar that protest action is taken now by the nurses or the healthcare workers when we have provided for them in the budget. And at that time, they were flatly refused and no action was taken whatsoever.
Well, maybe I could bring in Mr.
No
Ogle
complaints
here.
were made either.
In terms of the Ministry of Labor, and I know that there's a procedure when it comes to grievances by public servants and so on. Perhaps you can shed some light in terms of what would have transpired if the ministry has been engaged, or the Labor Department, the Labor unit there. Because I know, for instance, GPSU has delivered an ultimatum in that if in 72 hours they don't get a positive response, well, then they would move to strike action from October 7th. So if you could have your response as the Chief Labor Officer at the Ministry of Labor.
Thank you for having me here this afternoon. In a nutshell, let me outline what the procedure is in the law. Georgetown Public Hospital is termed an essential services. As such, it is now under, or you're guided by the Essential Services Arbitration Act. To answer your question to the point is that before protests, sit-ins, or strike action is taken, at least management should be involved. I say management first. I will outline what else should happen. Or let me outline what else should happen. The Essential Services Act, this is the legislation will govern the area of this dispute. In 1999, when the Georgetown Public Hospital became a corporate body, a body corporate, to date there isn't a collective labor agreement. The said legislation that we're referring to all the time is what would guide this dispute. So, what the law says, and it's in the act, that a month's notice, therefore, let me read what I have here. Therefore, the procedure to follow according to the law at section 3.1 of the said act is the minister is to be written to informing him about the dispute. Or in ordinary words, is a month's notice. They must give a month's notice. Then at section 12 of the same act, it gives the minister 1 month to refer the matter for settlement before any strike action could be taken. Now, to answer your question specifically, obviously if you're going to go about on a sit-in or a strike action or protest, whatever terminology is being used, management should be engaged, should be informed. And you only have those actions when there's a breakdown between the parties. If there's a stalemate, or if the grievance or the dispute cannot be resolved, settled, well then you go to those other areas, those strike action or the protest.
So,
but then the law is clear what must be done, what must be followed. I want to pause there because I will add.
Yes, well, coming back to you, Minister, I wanted to talk about some of the measures that are in the proposed budget, the emergency budget, and those that speak to providing for the healthcare workers and frontline workers in general. Because I know the statement, the Ministry of Public Service put out a statement when it spoke about allocation within that 150 million. Perhaps you could expound on that.
Well, the allocation, the Ministry of Health will be in a better position to tell you exactly how much will be allocated to any one person. But before I even get to that, Andrea, I wanted to state that everything that is in the budget is for the benefit of all Guyanese. Now, the healthcare services, and even before we got in there, by the time we got into office, the government got into office on the 2nd of August. It was in PPEs were not available, information was not available to persons. They were working in horrendous conditions. Now, coming into office right now, we have a situation where it's so much better because we have adequate PPEs in the different hospitals available to the staff and frontline workers. Now, that is a huge step towards progress as it relates to the Ministry of Health. As it relates to your question, to the measures in the budget, we have the $25,000 per household cash grant. Now, that is beneficial to each and every household in Guyana. Public servants will be able to benefit. The health sector, who are public servants, will also be able to benefit from that. You have the $15,000 per child. So every public servant who has a child, every healthcare worker who has a child will benefit from that. You have the reduction in taxes, the reversal of taxes on numerous things that would be able to benefit these persons. It will give them relief they will be able to put have money in their pockets. You also have the reversal, but the taxes being reduced in relation to water and electricity. That is beneficial because that is something that is before you can blink, those bills come around.
Yes, I agree.
So that is quite beneficial. So we have different measures. And I want to put this out there, Andrea. The government is committed to taking care of all Guyanese. And it is just less than 2 months. And we had to have an emergency budget. You can't have everything in the emergency budget. We have tried as best as we can with the financial constraints to be able to provide for frontline workers as well. And within the next 5 years and at the end of 5 years, you will be able to see that all Guyanese are going to benefit from this government.
What you say is perhaps putting the cart before the horse, or as a last resort, they've looked at strike action first before even trying to exhaust all the possibilities.
Yes, definitely. Well, I would put it this way. I would put it this strongly, that the protest actions at the moment, I deem them to be illegal, because there are procedures that are to be invoked in the Essential Services Arbitration Act. The Arbitration Act kicks in as soon as you feel that you have a dispute.
Well, that's where I'd like to bring back Mr. Ogle to talk about the legality of strike action when it comes to industrial relations and so on. And perhaps you could explain, what is in the Essential Services Act and what has been done outside of that act, and maybe what are the measures that should have been done instead.
Well, there's an ultimatum. The union is saying there's an ultimatum.
That an ultimatum is still in force from
they are saying
2019.
They are saying that. The union is saying that. The ultimatum was served 24th of January 2019. However, this is what we learned, that there was a meeting between the parties, Ministry of Health and Public Hospital, and the union to resolve the issue. Committees were formed with a view of finding a solution. The Ministry of Labor wouldn't be able to answer what is the outcome or what happened. However, prior to this COVID, the beginning or the start of the COVID, the nurses filed a petition for risk allowance, etc. And our understanding is that that was granted. So the engagement twice for the same issues. What is before us is the ultimatum still valid? Because the union is saying that the ultimatum still exists. So it is clear, as I said earlier, notice is supposed to be given to the minister. And you cannot go about, as the minister said, the essential services, there's an act, a legislation guiding the process. So you have to give. So what I'm saying is that they're claiming that the notice was given, but that is since 2019. Is it valid? So obviously, as I said earlier, you must engage management.
And the committees you had mentioned about having committees to discuss and engage and to,
Yeah, well, we learned about
negotiate.
this. We were informed. We don't know this before.
So the
they did
ministry
establish two committees.
The
is
ministry
what we were
wasn't
told.
part of the
No, the ministry,
negotiation.
we not part. We only come in, the Ministry of Labor come in and I'll put it easy as the second to last stage. We are the stage before arbitration. So we are allowed to conciliate. That is when the parties break down. There's no solution. There's a stalemate. When they can't find agreement. Well, then now either party could request our intervention.
Because I just want to mention the statement by GPHC where they were saying that the workers are engaging in an illegal and illegitimate action before exhausting the proper industrial relations practices and procedures set out in the Public Utility Undertakings and Public Health Services Act. So is it a case where perhaps the aggrieved parties now need to come to the table?
Yeah, well, they have to do that. They'll have to meet. Well, I would have, in closing and concluding, I would have put up a suggestion. What's supposed to happen, or what is customary, or what is the practice? And the practice is, failing which, if the parties can't come to an agreement, an amicable settlement, if a stalemate exists, well, then we would intervene. We don't necessarily have to wait until that. We could intervene. I don't want to say at any time, but you must allow the parties to have a discussion, to meet, to see if they could resolve it.
Minister? Yeah.
Jumping in right there, and let me just get back to this. So there are several procedures, step-by-step procedures set out in the Public Utilities or Essential Services Arbitration Act. Now, those when, exactly what Mr. Ogle said, when there's a breakdown is when you get to arbitration. But there are several things that you must exhaust, several steps and procedures that you must exhaust before. This is a last resort. It's a last resort, and it has to come from a breakdown. Now, the other issue is, in relation to all industrial action practices and norms, you don't call for talks with an ultimatum. Most certainly not. Most certainly not. You cannot do that. You can't at the same time protest, give an ultimatum, expecting all parties to act on the duress. You cannot do that. You have a procedure set out, and you should follow the law. And especially where we, again I will reiterate, especially where we have a situation where they would have made certain requests before. I'm not stating grievances. They would have made certain requests before. Those were not honored. Nothing was done. To the public, how does this look? How does this look? And then these nurses who are working and the healthcare workers who are working, you're going in there and you're instigating, and you are actually luring them to act unlawfully to their detriment, and that should not be. These persons are needed in the health sector. They are needed. The patients need them. They are important, especially in this time of the COVID pandemic.
And Minister, we just have about 5 to 10 minutes before we wrap up. But what would be your final appeal to those healthcare workers, and to reassure them that the government has their best interests at heart?
Well, the first indication that the government has the best interests at heart is the fact that they were refused frontline allowances, and we have, without a protest, without a request, without a grievance complaint, the government has catered for them in the budget. That is the first indication. The second thing is the government has pledged and committed to all Guyanese, the public sector, the health sector, everyone, that they will act in the best interest and for the well-being of all those persons, of all Guyanese. And going forward in the next 5 years, the government will make provision for public servants, for the healthcare workers. I mean, they're public servants as well, right? But they will be, we don't know how long COVID will be around. So the government will make provisions later on. Protest action is most certainly not the way to go. It is not the way that you want to say your request. The other issue is, I'm going to say to nurses that your services are valued. Your services are recognized. We have appealed before, and we are saying this, and we are urging all healthcare workers, whether they be nurses or otherwise, not to be intimidated, not to be lured into actions which will be deemed unlawful or can be deemed unlawful and act to their detriment. at the end of 5 years, they will see that their lives will improve. And the government right now has shown its commitment from 2nd of August to now in terms of providing for them for their safety and their security in their jobs better than they were before, prior to the 2nd of August.
Any immediate timelines in terms of after this budget has been passed to have the healthcare workers seen some of the initial benefits outlined in the measures financially, if it's the risk allowance or otherwise? Would that happen before the end of the year, or is there any kind of time frame that they could expect?
The Minister of Health will be able to update you on that in a better way, because he would be more familiar with what exactly is happening in his sector in terms of the budgetary measures and how that will be allocated. So, but what I do know is that they will benefit from it, and I can even say this now, that with whatever is provided with what is provided for them in the budget, as the budget is being released, I am most certain that they will be considered quickly.
And Mr. Ogle, I know you had some suggestions moving forward, you know, in terms of the procedure and what could be done, because we're basically at the end of the road before we even started walking down the road. So,
well, we are always ready. That is the role, the function, or the mandate of the Ministry of Labor. We are always ready to intervene, or put it another way, to conciliate, to bring. We don't want people on the streets protesting or striking. So we are always available. And whenever called upon, we are there to provide the services that we are accustomed to doing, custom and practice.
So it means that those who are aggrieved, they can definitely approach the Ministry of Labor and to
but
have
as ministers say, it has been catered for, so I don't think we'll reach there. If the money is available, it will be paid, so be it. They may not even consider coming by us. They may not reach that stage.
Because as you
but
said,
we are always
you're
available.
usually just before arbitration. So once this could be resolved even before then, it may not have to reach to the Ministry of Labor. But I must say thank you very much, Mr. Ogle, the Chief Labor Officer for the Ministry of Labor, and Honorable Minister Sonia Parag, the Minister of Public Service. Hopefully you've had some more insight on this program Insight as we get to understand the issues that are in the news and the issues that would affect all of us as Guyanese. Thank you so much for watching, and continue to stay tuned to NCN. Goodbye.